Mr. Chair, you're ready.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, take two. Welcome to Development Review Commission for January 8th, 2019. I'd like to begin by introducing those that we have with us. On my left, we have Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Amorosi, Commissioner Sumners. I am Chairman David Lyon. To my right is Vice Chair DiDomenico, Commissioner Don Casano, and Commissioner Brown. Also from city staff, we have with us in our audience, we have Ryan Levesque, and we have Blake with us. We also have Saparna Dasgupta, Karen Stovall, Lee Jimenez, and Christopher Ray, and Steve Abramson. We have reviewed our meeting minutes from our previous meeting on, was it November 27th? And we have found no edits to be made in them, so we are now going to go ahead and hear a motion regarding their approval. Can I hear such a motion, please?
Motion to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor by show of hands, please. And the motion passes 7-0. Let me go ahead and now read our preamble, which I've kind of rolled past here. The purpose of this commission is for the creation of a desirable environment for residents, business, and industry through aesthetics and good site planning by promoting harmonious, safe, and attractive and compatible development that is therefore considered to be in the best interest of public health, safety, and general welfare. We have on our agenda tonight 3 cases, one of which we have chosen to put on our consent agenda. If there's anyone with us that would like to hear this case, we can certainly make that possible. The one item that we have chosen to put on consent is Fisher's Tools and Handles. Is there anyone in our audience that would like to hear that case and make comment? Seeing none, we'll keep that on our consent agenda, and I would like to hear a motion regarding said consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, I move approval of the consent agenda.
Okay, motion from Vice Chair DiDomenico. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Scott Sumners, a second. All those in favor by show of hands, please. And the motion passes 7-0. Having taken care of that, we'll move on to our second item, which is the Skinner residence, and we'll ask Ms. Karen Stovall, or no, Lee Jimenez who's going to tell us about this one. Sorry.
Good evening, Commission Chair David Lyon. My name is Lee Jimenez. I'm the Senior Planner with the Community Development Department in the Planning Division. The Skinner residence is a single-family residential rebuild proposed on Lot 6 of the Gage Addition subdivision, which is located on the east side of South Maple Avenue between West 10th and 9th Streets in the R3 multifamily residential district. The project consists of a 2-story single-family residence with a basement and a rear-facing detached garage. The use permit is required to replace the single-story, single-family dwelling that currently exists there with 2 or more stories pursuant to the land use matrix provided in Section 3-102, Permitted Uses in Residential Districts of the Zoning and Development Code. The use permit standard is required to reduce the required side yard building setback from 10 feet to 8 feet for the main house pursuant to Section 4-201A use permit standard section of the Zoning and Development Code. The detached garage at the rear conforms to setback requirements for accessory buildings. A neighborhood meeting was held at 5 o'clock in the evening on December 6, 2018 at the Skinner residence. About a dozen people attended the meeting. A majority of the attendees expressed opposition to the project and suggested that the Skinners renovate the existing home instead. So far to date, staff is in receipt of 2 written public comments in support of both the use permit and use permit standard requests, and 1 written comment in support of the use permit request, but in opposition to the use permit standard request. His response was that he believed there should be a variance and not, or that particular person, it should be a variance and not a use permit standard application. So based on the information provided by the applicant, and the public input received, staff supports the requested use permit and the use permit standard request subject to the conditions of approval provided in the staff report. So some of the concerns that staff has are the separate entrance on the south elevation, that in combination with the orientation of the stairwell with direct access to that entrance, and then just the design concern about the detached garage and the area for parking adjacent to the alley. We had a condition to recommend at the minimum 16 feet from the property line to the garage to allow for a vehicle to be parked without obstructing the public alley. Here we have the site plan. To your left-hand side is north. So you'll see the main house, detached garage, alley, and this is Maple. This is the basement floor plan. Then we have the ground level. The packet has this floor plan, which shows the direct exit to the outside along the side here through a guest bedroom, which leads up to the second floor, which has some bedrooms and a kitchenette. We have elevations. Here's that south elevation with that door, separate door entrance from the south side. And then here are elevations for the detached garage, which conform to the development standards for accessory buildings. And here's some photos of the site. This photo is from the rear, from the alley. This is from the front. And we have some aerial photos of the site. And as you recall, at study session, I provided you with revisions that were shared by the applicant on Friday. And those revisions, and with those revisions, they made some attempts to comply with some of the conditions of approval that were recommended by staff. The door was replaced with a window. We have a concern about that because of the possibility of that turning into a door, or the easier possibility of that turning into a door in the future. And staff would rather have a den area as opposed to the guest room as they're currently proposing on the revised set. I'll be available should you have any questions regarding the application.
Okay, questions for Mr. Jimenez? Vice Chair DiDomenico.
I didn't think of this before when I was reviewing this case, but the existing freestanding garage, is that remaining? Is it being remodeled? Is it a tear down?
That is proposed for demolition.
Okay, so demolition and new garage.
That's correct.
Did we see design and elevation drawings for the garage portion?
There are
Are
elevations in the packet.
There
of
are,
the garage. I'll need you to click the link.
Point me to the attachment and I'll look at these.
So it should be the elevations right after the house elevations. There's the main
Thank you.
house elevation and then the detached. I can pull up on the screen briefly. So here's the house, and then here are the garage elevations.
Just as a reminder, though, because this is a single family proposed, we do not have design review purview over this at this point for the elevations.
I have a question, Lee. Do we by chance know the square footage of the existing home?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but I'm sure the applicant can provide you with that answer.
Okay. And then I see that we have this home is 4,314 square feet. And I saw in very, very tiny print some square footages elsewhere on the prints. But do we know what the footprint of this proposed house is?
Building footprint meets the landscape coverage requirements for the R3 zoning district. Off the top of my head, I don't know the area of the building envelope.
Okay.
Or the proposed building envelope. But if I had to guess, I would say maybe 1,600 feet, 600-foot footprint for the main house.
Okay, I'm not going to hold you to that, but thank you for guessing. Okay, other questions for Mr. Jimenez? Commissioner Johnson?
With the revised design that we saw, removing that door to the exterior is now the only way up and down, the only access to that second story is through the guest room?
It's through, Commissioner Johnson, it's through the main entrance along Maple and then through that guest room
The guest room.
at that corner. Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. All right, so in just a few moments, we're going to get to our public hearing section. If you wish to make comment on this case, should be some white cards in the back. Please fill one out and hand them to our lovely city staff, so we'll get you a chance to speak. And in the meantime, let's ask our applicant if you'd like to come and tell us about your project. Oh, there you are.
Hi, my name is Tad Skinner and my wife Katina. We have lived in Tempe for about 15 years and I've worked in that neighborhood for about 20 years. And we want to design a house that fits our lifestyle. As you heard in the study session, I'm a pastor of a church that's in that neighborhood, and one of our ministry philosophies is to allow missionaries, other church members to live occasionally with us. And so we wanted to design something that was single family that would allow semi-private space, but not cut off from our family, because we enjoy being in community with other people and wanted to allow for a design that will allow us to have that community feel of having people that could come and go into our house. So we designed the house in that way. It's not our intent, as some questions came up, to design this as a multifamily home, but as a single family so that we could have community with the people that we hold near and dear to us. We also have some kids that will be going to college, hopefully at ASU in the next couple of years, so that would be also a space for them to have a little bit of privacy and have some independence in their life, but also be connected, continue to be connected to us and our family.
Okay, anything else you'd like to tell us about your project? We have read what's in the packet, and that's, I think, speaks for itself pretty well. I want to make sure I've given you the time that you wish, though.
I'm the designer on the project, and my name's Jared Lineberger. If you guys have any technical questions, you had asked how much coverage it is. I can give you that information directly, because I realize it probably is fairly small on there. The lot size is 7,000 square feet, as you know, and our total footprint with the detached garage is 2,700 square feet. Without the garage, it is the footprint of the actual house is 1,500 square feet, and then there's a front and back porch which total about 700 square feet. So you're right at about 2,000 square feet total lot coverage for the house.
All right, thank you. Other questions for our applicant? Commissioner Brent?
The house is right at 900 square feet.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
not
good.
including the garage, but just the actual footprint of the existing house is about 900 square feet.
Very good, thank you. Commissioner Brent?
I see steps up to the, a front porch with steps up to the main floor. What's the elevation from grade, what's the dimension from grade down to the basement floor?
Can you clarify your question? I'm not quite sure. I
Yes, the
understand.
basement is not a full floor below grade because of the floors are raised up a little bit.
We raised the house up 2'4" off of grade to try to mitigate how deep we had to dig to try to mitigate cost. And to give it kind of the feel of the neighborhood that already has stoops and a raised porch.
Yeah, I think we like the sort of bungalow front entrance. The reason I'm asking is there's a 12-inch wide air slot on the north side with 3 windows to the hall, to the stairwell, the bathroom, and the other part of the bathroom with 2 sinks. So you're digging a foundation wall which is dimensioned as 12 feet wide, or something's 12 feet wide. I guess it's the wall. There's only a 12-inch space, and over the years
All that is for a light well. It's
Right.
basically just to create enough space to allow light to come in those high windows in the
Right. My comment is over the years that'll be filled in with leaves and blowing dust, and it's almost impossible to clean a space
out.
that's 12 inches wide. So by the time you go to that depth, you could, for virtually the same cost, move that wall out to the north and have a stairwell a light well that lets more light in and is more cleanable.
For sure, and we would.
That's kind of
we were just trying to give it some movement in the plan to kind of offset things to give it some interest. But by all means, it's a valid comment to widen that out a little bit so it'd be easier to clean out later on.
Okay, and I guess my other comment was the 3 bedrooms in the basement are all served, their egress is all achieved by a light well?
They're achieved by actual egress wells.
A well
But-
with a ladder or something in it?
Yes, they all meet residential code requirements for egress wells.
You obviously checked the code dimensions and I'm
Oh,
sure
yes,
it meets.
absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So now let me do something really quick, and let's remind ourselves that what we're hearing tonight are use permits. And we don't get to say too much about design issues, but we do consider the 5 criteria for the use permits, the 2 of them, increase in vehicular traffic, the various nuisances, deterioration of the neighborhood, compatibility with the existing surrounding structures, and adequate control of disruptive behavior. Having reminded ourselves of that, are there any other questions that we'd like to, Commissioner Brown?
Yes, you've identified that this is a single-family dwelling, but you have guests and so forth, and quite a few bedrooms and potentially 2 or 3 almost discrete spaces. These guests, I assume, have cars or rent cars, or they're here with you for some time?
Some may and some may not.
Okay, so what I'm getting to is it may be called a single-family dwelling, but in fact, you're proposing to have really a multifamily situation. So there is a parking impact, conceivably.
Possibly, but as you know, the city of Tempe has really worked hard at transit, and we live very close to the church as well. So it's about a half mile away.
I can also attest to that a little bit in the fact that I attend the same church as they do. Most of the people who come and visit, especially guests in relation to visiting speakers or missionaries, stuff like that, they are here being provided for transportation by the people usually that they're staying with. So there should not be a significant impact to the use of parking on the site.
Okay.
Or on the street, by that matter. And we are within walking distance of the church. So if there was any major issue with the parking requirements, it's 3 blocks from the church that they could park at the church parking lot if they really needed to.
I guess I respect the intentions and so forth, and you're in a situation where you could probably be there for several decades, but at some point this will be someone else's home. And it appears to be easily convertible into a multifamily, and I think some of the neighbors probably will comment to that effect, and that's really a concern that's relevant to our hearing tonight. Thank you.
I would agree that it does seem that way, and had we really understood that there was a difference between the multifamily or the 2 like the duplex or triplex, we probably would have approached this differently. But we weren't clear on the fact that this was going to be a problem when we started through this process. And so we by no means are trying to make that, but the property is in fact zoned for multi-use. So the multi-use, in my humble opinion, the multi-use is not really, or should I say the multifamily is not really the issue as much as it is potentially the parking issue and a few other small zoning requirements. But we're allowed by the right of the zoning, we're allowed to have up to 3 dwellings there. So the concern of somebody using it for multi-dwelling in the future is, to my opinion, is secondary. Not, and I realize there's some semantics there and some code issues with single family versus multifamily, and we're not trying to circumvent those. We were just unclear, and now we're trying to work within those guidelines to make sure that we don't have to go back through this process to start over, essentially.
Okay, Commissioner Johnson, I saw your hand first.
I actually have a question to staff real quick. Do we have a good grasp, and is it even fair to ask what the deficiencies would be with respect to design if this were to have been a multifamily request?
Commissioner Johnson, so primary concern would be parking. The site would, based on the number of bedrooms for these two, if there were two separate units, would require 5.4 spaces of parking. They are providing 2 inside the garage, and they have 2 spaces to accommodate vehicles at the rear along the alley. So that's why I conditioned to have them expand that area so that a car can be parked there with no obstruction into the alley. And then they also want to maintain the existing historic driveway from Maple along the north edge of the property. That area has 1 parking space behind the 20-foot building setback. And because it's a single-family use, they can have a tandem space just to the west of that. So in total, they do have 6 parking space, off-street parking spaces, which would exceed what's required if it were a multifamily project.
That's not a deficiency then, it doesn't sound like. So are there any other deficiencies?
Well, there's other standards such as landscape area requirements, lighting standards, and other maybe some screening standards that are required for multifamily. So there are some other requirements that weren't reviewed within the scope of this project because it's intended for a single-family use. So I was reviewing and evaluating the project based on a single-family product as opposed to a multifamily product. But those are some of the constraints that a project would have, not including what building code may require. And I do know building code would require that they underground the overhead electrical, amongst other things. But to that extent is what would be required. And but at this point, I can't state what exactly the deficiencies would be because that wasn't part of the review.
Understandable. Thank you.
So now, correct me if I'm wrong, in addition to that, our process would be different in that we as a commission would be doing a DPR in which is that not so?
That is correct, although because it would be a 3 or 2 unit multifamily site, it would be an administrative review, so it would be a staff level design review. But as long as they're meeting all the development standards for the R3 zoning district, they could move forward with that process. But as you're aware, if there's a planning entitlement such as a setback reduction or even tandem parking in the future for a multifamily site, that would require use permits, which would require for them to go through this process again, or this process just as they are today.
All right. Commissioner Amorosi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to ask the Skinners if they're okay with the staff's recommendations on your project.
With the planning department,
Right.
the recommendations for the door, and is that what you're talking about?
Yes, if you have an issue with anything, or are you okay with everything?
Yes.
So to answer your question more thoroughly, the preferred would be to have the house how it was designed. If that's what you're ultimately trying to get at, is the preferred outcome would be to have approval for the way the house is designed. However, we are willing to work with staff to try to mitigate those concerns. I personally spoke to Mr. Chad Weaver. Unfortunately, he's not here tonight, I don't believe, to further this conversation. But he did tell us if we were to remove the door, the window was fine where it was at, and that we could keep the guest suite how it is, and that they would approve us on that. Unfortunately, again, he's not here to corroborate that essentially. But yes, we would prefer that we have the house designed. If we were to move the staircase, flop it as they're asking us to, we would have to go back to the structural engineer, redesign the house. It would be a couple $1,000s to have the house redesigned in such a way that the staircase would work to do that. And again, this goes back to the level of, I suppose you could call it miscommunication between us and staff about what the requirements would be. Because when I read the code, it says that you're not supposed to have direct access to the outside. And the way the house is designed, it doesn't have direct access to the outside. You have to come in, go onto a stoop. You can go into the main house, or you can go up a flight of stairs to get to the secondary unit. And I was trying to work within those guidelines and give the Skinners what they were desiring as a house. And if we missed that, we can accept that and we're trying to work with staff on that, but we would prefer it to be approved how it is. I don't know if that clarifies for
Thank
the
you,
board.
that's great.
All right, any other questions for our applicant? Yes.
Speak on the item matter regarding Chad's discussion with the applicant. We certainly advised and we had some discussion with Chad about the proposed modifications to the floor plan. And we had discussed that the provisions as suggested could potentially lead to a greater support by staff, but after further review and looking at the floor plans, we made a collective recommendation to the applicant in an email that was shared with Chad regarding what our position was on this. We were in support. It was meeting the intent of closing out the door that satisfied one of the conditions. We felt that the stairwell reorientation was not necessary if they could accommodate a den living unit that accessed the second floor and then modified the window casement design, or eliminating that window altogether.
All right, so, well, let me just say, you strike me as nice folks, and I'm sure your intentions are good. Unfortunately, that's not how I have to look at the project. I have to look at the project as it is, knowing that potentially someone else might own it and might do something different with it. And I'll tell you that I do feel like this should have gone the route of multifamily, so it can go through that type of design review. I think that we're missing some important things by doing that. Let me ask staff. What are our possible avenues here? I think that this project really ought to be reviewed properly as a multifamily. Is that a recommendation that we can make? I mean, I know we have our use permits in front of us and we could make a motion on those, but I mean, is that something that we can propose to our applicant? Are you willing to come back and do this as multifamily, or what are our options here?
The option, Chair, would be to, if that's the desire of the commission, because the agenda item, the way it's written right now, and the way staff has reviewed the project, it would be a direction that the commission should really request a continuance and then allow them to review, submit something that now complies with the multifamily standards for staff to review, because right now, like Lee said, we don't really have the purview, and I don't know if the applicant would be willing to, that's their question too, whether they would be willing to look at that option to resubmit for staff review in order to get to that point.
Okay. So thanks for bearing with my exploratory questions. I don't know how anyone else in the commission feels yet or how you feel. But I will just say, well, I'll just say I don't feel comfortable with the project as it is, because I think that second floor unit is clearly designed to be a rental or an Airbnb, or maybe in your case, you're only sharing it with people you know, but as a building, anybody else would Airbnb that. And I don't feel super comfortable with that. And I think that such a project really ought to go through a proper DPR where the design is reviewed, where parking and all those other standards are reviewed properly, and we're kind of scooting past that. And I'll also go ahead and say I'm a little uncomfortable with the project just because of the neighborhood. It is a very large house with a large excavation, and we're losing a lot of, I believe we're losing a lot of turf and trees in the process. And it's such an old neighborhood with such small homes. We do have, two-story rental units showing up in the area, and the play between the two is, that's a question, but I just feel awkward about it the way it is right now. So let me ask my fellow commission, is there anyone else that feels any of these similar concerns? Because I want to do this now while you're here so that we, if anyone else feels the same, we can ask you if you're interested in a continuance.
Vice Chair, do you want to open it to the public comment first before you?
Fair enough.
That would be mine. I'd like to hear public comment.
All right. So maybe I'm getting ahead. So Commissioner Summers, please.
Just a question. Mr. Skinner, Ms. Skinner, I appreciate your boldness in purchasing this site and proposing what you are. It's a pretty big change for the neighborhood, and if we're going to go through a process, we want to make sure you get what you want. So to make that decision, I think what would be helpful is to know what we're talking about. If we say it's a potential continuance, what's the timing of that? I mean, are we talking about a year? Are we talking about a couple months? Suparna, can you walk through that and just to give them a feel for what we're dealing with?
I can't give a specific timeline. It's based on when they submit to us, and we definitely would try to accommodate the applicant if that's the way they would like to go, to try to get them to the, earliest possible agenda as long as we can work, have the opportunity to review it. They would need the time to redesign it to some extent. So in a couple of months or, so possibly depending on what the proposal is and our public notification, because there is a new use permit for tandem parking would be required. So there's some logistics to getting those things together in a complete application. But we can definitely help and assist the applicant in getting a quick turnaround as to the extent possible and get it, out of trying to get it to a agenda.
All right, so let's do one more comment then. All right,
Well,
Commissioner Casano.
actually, it's not even a comment, it's more of a question to the applicant. The time is one thing that it would take to get this done, but there's an added cost to build it once you get it done. Can you justify in your budgets any additional cost of making this fit a multifamily dwelling requirement? They said the parking, undergrounding utilities, and any other things that might come up along the way. And that to me would be a concern, that we would be imposing upon you a financial burden to move it the other way.
With respect, before we purchased the property, we met with the city and were told that we could build a single family. We were very specific about what we wanted.
Exactly
Basement,
this house.
2 stories, separate entrance. We were told we could do it. Based on that, we bought the property, invested a significant amount of money. There's been a moving target lots of times, and now we're hearing a couple of months. On Friday, we were told that we would have full approval with the window. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, we were told of a change about 3 hours ago. So it is frustrating. I don't know what the added cost would be. There's already added costs that we weren't expecting because of the process that we've been put through. We were told we wouldn't have to have a neighborhood meeting. We were told we wouldn't have to have a city meeting, even with the use permit. So it's frustrating to continue to hear different things from people all along the way. So I don't know how to answer that question.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Let's move on a little bit here.
Can I ask, am I allowed to ask a question?
All right. Go ahead.
Why is there a discussion about the neighborhood when we are owners in the neighborhood? And we designed a house that we met with the historic preservation officer, and we followed all that he told us to do, and he told us some things about the neighborhood, and we did everything that they told us to do. So why now is that an issue? Why are you doing that? Why would you even bring that up today?
Well, Mrs. Skinner, I believe it's our responsibility to do that. John Southard doesn't sit on this commission, and whatever he has advised you, I'm sure, he's a sharp guy. He advised you wisely, I'm sure. But we have to look at the standards of what's in front of us. And maple, ash, neighborhood in specific is, I mean, that is like our most historic neighborhood with the most clear character, in my opinion. And it's up to us to ask questions about, do these projects fit? You know, does this work well for our neighborhood? And I can tell you, I don't know how many dozen times I've sat here and had somebody in our audience say, such and such a project in Maple Ash doesn't fit, and we don't want you to approve it. And we have to consider those things. So we have to raise those issues. I'm not saying I think your project is bad. I just think we have to consider it properly. So now, having said that, I hope that answer satisfies you. I think we should get to our public comment section. It may give us a little more litmus test. Other people have ideas about this. So if you'd be kind enough to have a seat, we'll ask you to come back up in a little bit. Oh yeah, this may be very short. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to make comment on this?
Mr. Lyon, Chairman Lyon, my name is Steve Cephos. I'd appreciate it if you, Lee, could pull up the map that we talked about earlier today. I had some different comments, actually, that I was going to make, but I'm going to take a deep breath and instead say, you know, Mr. Lyon, I am completely offended by absolutely everything you've said. And I hope this commission doesn't share your concerns and your responsibilities. You specifically said at the beginning of this meeting that you were going to deal specifically with the use permits. You said even design shouldn't matter at this point. You admonished your other commissioners to not deal with design. Then you turned around and started talking about Maple Ash as a historic neighborhood and what fits and what doesn't. That is not part of your responsibility tonight. You made that clear. So let me start by saying that's offensive to those of us that have worked 30 years in that neighborhood to try to attract people like the Skinners. Do we have a map up? Okay. This? Could you do it for me? Sure. Okay. The three properties that are south for the Skinners, 921, 923, and 949. Those are mine. 21 West 9th, can you go up to that property? Ninth Street, 21 West 9th. The properties on Mill Avenue between the University Motel and the sandwich shop are mine. I think if you take in total those properties, I think you're talking about the vast majority of that block. Again, I've worked 30 years to try to get people to invest in a meaningful way, not to keep a 700 square foot shack so that you can say Maple Ash is a special place. It's to take advantage of the zoning that's there, make that neighborhood more owner occupied, as opposed to the rental desert that it is right now. So I'm the one who's affected by this variance, my property, and I support it. The semantical argument that you're in right now about whether it should be multifamily or whether it should be single family has nothing to do than just parking. If it was multifamily, you'd want more parking. But this is what the neighborhood wants. We have worked to attract families who have dreams and ideas about how they want to live. And this is how you're welcoming people to this neighborhood. This is what you're doing. You guys are pushing people away who want to bring families, churches, real people into the neighborhood, as opposed to the rentals we have now. You're putting structures in front of people. And that's the problem with Maple Ash for the last 30 years that I've been there. It was all about the buildings and now not about the people who are occupying it. That's not how you build community. So if you want to know how much support there is for this, I support it. And I'm the one that's affected by it. And again, I'm going to tell you, I'm offended by your remarks. And I hope that you will look at this, as you said, the use permits. He's asking for 2 feet. That's all it is. There's multiple units on my properties. He's going to have an extra door on a single building. And somehow we have a problem. The last thing I want to say is the staff has treated these guys terribly. They've been trying for the last 2 or 3 days to get with staff and say, where are we with this? If we do everything that you guys ask, are we good to go? And at the 10th hour, they didn't even return phone calls to these guys. And you should look into that process because it's wrong to treat people like this. They're investing $1 million into this neighborhood. And that's the way they're being treated. So you're wrong. There is no vast majority of people that are opposed to this.
All right, so questions for Mr. Cephos? Seeing none, well, thank you. All right. Do we have anyone else from our public who wishes to make comment? Yes, sorry, that's right. Karen Gitlis, please. Again, reminder I should have done before. We like to ask you to take 3 minutes, and we've got lights for you to remind you.
Okay, I do have prepared comments, but I would also like to respond to Mr. Cephos and say that, Mr. Lyon, I appreciate so much as a longtime, nearly 40-year resident of Maple Ash, a property owner. I own 2 properties in the neighborhood and have worked for 32 years to worked on historic preservation, preserving my neighborhood as the oldest remaining neighborhood in the city of Tempe. I appreciate your consciousness of that. That goes very far with me. We also, in response to his comments, have built a community that is unparalleled anywhere in the valley in terms of individual homeowners and renters without a homeowners association who are linked together very, very closely. And we are, I believe, a majority in this neighborhood. Development Review Board Commissioners. I am Karen Gitlis, 1206 South Ash, 38-year resident in Maple Ash, renter, now owner of a property. I am speaking for the Maple Ash Neighborhood Association. Our association is very concerned about this proposed development. Our mission is to preserve and enhance the historic and residential character of the neighborhood. We do not want to lose the historic eligible Scudder rental at 919 South Maple without the opportunity to explore opportunities to avoid demolition. We have lost this opportunity because the application for demolition was not published to the historic neighborhood. We also object to the continued encroachment of institutional uses into this residentially zoned neighborhood. Tad and Katina Skinner met with the neighbors on December 6th. Prior to that, there had been no information about their program and no word from the city on the proposed demolition of an historic eligible structure. Although the architect of record was present at the neighborhood meeting, neither he nor the Skinners were able to answer some of the questions from neighbors or show a complete copy of plans for the house. Tad exhorted the group to have faith in him as a pastor and in his project. He told us he had 2 sons who would hopefully attend ASU and that he himself had long wished to be able to walk to work at his church on Mill and 13th. The house and this house location was perfect to do that. It would be a single family home for them and their children. End point. The couple declined to consider saving the historic house building behind it. They described a new structure that would be 4,300 square feet, not including a 2-car garage. The house will include 6 bedrooms, a casita. The first story of the house will be underground. You know all that. Their story was not consistent on its face, especially when they appeared during and after the meeting to have close ties to the people living in the house across the street from the Scudder rental. Based on online research, this family owns this home, the Skinner family, and also the home across the street at 928 South Maple, the historic Spain home. The Spain home has been badly vetted for major add-ons with a large number of bedrooms to make it ideal for institutional uses. The Neighborhood Association has concerns that the uses projected for this property are not consistent with standard neighborhood residential uses. We ask that the Development Review Review Board commissioners postpone a decision on this case to a later meeting for the following reasons. Our meeting, a neighborhood meeting on December 6th, was physically uncomfortable, and the presenters were unprepared. The request for the use permit for a second story was added only after the neighborhood meeting. 3, there was no publication of a demolition permit that had been submitted, and its timeline has now expired. They can tear down at any time, and they are. They're taking the siding off, and it's supposedly asbestos, and who knows what's going on with that.
Ms. Gitlis, could you please wrap up quickly?
I am. These are the points I would like you to consider. There has not been adequate time to review the the packet because of the publishing timeline. The use permit standard is really a variance. It's only necessary to intensify build on the property. And finally, neighbors are concerned about institutional uses on this property in contradiction to owner claims for residential only use. And we request that you explore this topic to obtain clarification from the owners. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, questions for Ms. Gitlis? Any? Thank you. I do have a question for staff. Ms. Gitlis said that the second story was not present at the time of the public meeting, and that only came later. Is that correct?
That is correct. When we were in the process of setting up their neighborhood meeting, there was no formal submittal at the time. Everything was based off of what they were proposing and verbally as far as what was going to be on the site. And I wasn't aware at the time that there would be a second story. All I was aware of was that there would be a setback reduction request, which is the use permit standard. That second story.
No plans were shown.
There was no submittal at the time.
You will have a moment to come back up. Don't worry, we'll get back to you. File it away. We'll get back to it. All right, thank you. So there's an asterisk on that.
And
Yes,
just to add,
Mr. Levesque?
the neighborhood meeting was held on December 6th, and the formal submittal was received on December 12th.
Okay. Mr. Levesque, you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll also clarify that the neighborhood meeting is a policy we have. It's not a requirement of the code to require this neighborhood meeting because it's a use permit. We require neighborhood meetings for variances or PADs, but this was a policy-initiated neighborhood meeting to garner early on input for the project.
Fair enough. Commissioner Saunders.
Sorry, can you just clarify policy? I mean, it's not in code, or how would the Skinners have known about this?
As a result of the consultation with staff, when we have a development project that requires a public hearing or meeting with either council or the Development Review Commission, we meet with them to recommend to hold a neighborhood meeting prior to having the public meetings or hearings. So this is a consultation that happens with the applicant when we review the plan and provide the applicant comments.
For all development?
All development that requires a public meeting or a public hearing. In specifically Maple Ash, sorry, I need to clarify.
Only applies in Maple Ash?
Yes. Correct.
Okay.
All right. I also have a card for Jenny Lucier.
Good evening. My name is Jenny Lucier. I reside at 823 South Maple Avenue. I've lived in the neighborhood for, I think, 33 years, going on 34 years. I am a property owner next door to this property, so I am impacted as well by this. I don't live there, but I own that. I'm a majority share property owner. I own it with about 32 of my neighbors who purchased that property for the purpose of preventing its demolition. There is a very strong majority of people in that neighborhood who feel very passionately about preserving it and not having places demolished, our precious historic resources demolished. We are a clear majority. Let there be no mistake about that, please. I have personal feedback about this, and I have some technical feedback about this. This is a difficult one for me. I met with Katina separately after the neighborhood meeting. We walked through the neighborhood. We shared a lot of information. I provided a lot of ideas about alternatives. For example, there's a lot 2 doors to the north of where their property is that is currently vacant. I believe that would be a better site for this project, though I still have problems with the way it's designed and the use permits that are being requested. But with that alternative, and I provided other ideas and other alternatives that might meet their needs better than losing a property. If they moved 2 doors north on a vacant lot, we wouldn't lose that property. So there are alternatives to this particular project, and I would like the opportunity to have more time to explore those and have more conversations with the applicant to see if we can work something out in that direction that would meet our needs and meet their needs. It could be a win-win situation with a different site and slightly different design. So those are some personal feedback. Technical feedback, really the only reason they need those extra 2 feet is because the project, the site is over-intensified. That land is being over-intensified. And that, I believe, is within your purview. I don't understand also why this is a use permit and not a variance. Things must have changed since I've been involved with these processes. So other than that, in no particular order, so clearly I'm in opposition of this. In no particular order, I would agree that this is out of scale. I would say that the neighborhood meeting was inadequate. There were no plans there. We couldn't see, we didn't get a clear idea of what the purpose was and what the design was at that neighborhood meeting. And in fact, one of the uses that would impact parking that was mentioned as a concern is a weekly meeting that would bring a lot of people there. And I believe in that kind of community and having, but when things are addressed in the appropriate way and in the appropriate process. I appreciate your comments, Chairman Lyon, and would echo those. I also agree with everything Karen Gitlis said. I would ask also that you consider when designing this if there are any differences in those standards in reviewing an R3 property that's next door to an R2 property. That is an R2 property next door that we own. I would also say that there is a lot more to a multifamily standards than compared to a single family than parking. There are several things. There's lighting, there's landscape, there's other amenities, there's bike parking, there's underground. It's not just about parking. So thank you very much for your time. I sure hope we get another neighborhood meeting and another opportunity to really know what's going on with this property. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Lucier? Vice Chair DiDomenico.
You mentioned a vacant lot to the north that you propose as an alternative. Is that property that's for sale?
I know the owner, and I think he would be amenable to.
Who is the owner?
Do I want to say that out? He's the owner of Casey Moore's. His name is David Arcules. Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Brown.
Is there a for sale sign on that lot?
No.
Okay, and one other, not really related question, but to the south of this property, I see the alley is lined with what looks like a row of parking spaces. It appears that there may be 10 in total. Are those, does the neighborhood in general feel badly about the alleys being turned into parking lots? I guess I'm asking your opinion. I just wonder if there's any discussion in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I'm trying to recall.
I certainly see that there are.
I think it, you know, it's kind of a case-by-case basis. I'm flying by the seat of my pants here, but I'm trying to remember discussions and all the, you know, the years and years of planning and design charrettes that we've had. You know, I think it. No generalization. Yeah, I don't think we've discussed that specifically as a problem with the neighborhood. I think it depends on the rest of the use of the property, on the rest of the design, you know, if we're losing a building for it, you know, those kinds of things. Yeah,
I mean, it looks like you've given, everyone's given up on the east side of the alley, which is all parking. And I'm worried about just encroachment on such a nice green neighborhood.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, and I didn't get to that point because I was kind of running out of time there. But yeah, loss of space for landscaping and vegetation, loss of the actual vegetation that's already there, that's big because this neighborhood is a lot about vegetation, and that's what attracts a lot of people to the neighborhood. Yeah, for sure. And that feeds into the whole scale of this particular project as well.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Thank you, Ms. Lucier. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one more card here for, I think this says Eric Naylor. Please.
Thank you. My name is Eric. I live directly across the street from this new home on Maple. I don't know if anybody was in that home in the last year, but I had been, and it definitely had more dogs than people living in it. For my family, with my 3 girls, we were quite glad to see a family moving in as opposed to a person with lots of dogs. I remember going to the meeting across the street, and it wasn't the nicest because it was super cold, but I felt that some of the things that were said by some of the residents here just were not true. I remember looking at the documents of a second story. I don't know what conversation it was with the city, but the plans were there, and we spent a long time talking about a second story. So I'm shocked to hear some of the things from the people in the neighborhood. I don't think there's a strong majority in the neighborhood that this house shouldn't be built. I do think there is a strong opinion from some people, but by the vacancy of this room, and it is in walking distance, I walked here from our neighborhood, there is not a strong pushback against this. I know most of the people in the neighborhood. My wife knows more. She's a stay-at-home mom of our 3 girls, and there is no uprising from the families that there's a new family in town. If anything, it's the exact opposite. I don't look at a lot of the maps of houses in the neighborhood, but I've been in several, and I think there are quite a few. There are small homes, but there's quite a few large homes. With this basement, it doesn't seem like there's going to be a massive structure that looks out of place. It seems like there's going to be another home with a family in it, and that seems like a positive thing to me. The positives seem to outweigh the negatives in so many ways. I think one of the people are talking about what happens to the vegetation. A homeowner cares about the vegetation a lot more than a renter. So as somebody who's lived here for just now going on 4 years, I think this is a positive thing. And I think the idea that most of the neighborhood is appalled by this is just really silly. So thank you guys for your time.
All right, any questions for Mr. Naylor? No, thank you then. All right, last chance. Anyone from the public wish to make comment? You've had your turn, Mr. Cephos, thank you. So with that, we will close our public hearing section, and we will ask the Skinners if they'd like to come back up and make reply to the things they've heard.
A lot to respond to. Yeah. What's the format? Just want me to speak?
In any order that you feel like, whatever stands out to you that you'd like to respond to, the floor is yours. We can ask questions if it helps to jog your memory.
Let me start with saying we tried to go through all of the steps that they're saying that they were not notified in the proper times, and there was some lack of communication. When we had our neighborhood meeting, I sat down with Mr. Jimenez and asked him what the guidelines for the neighborhood meeting would be and what the ideal situation was. And he said his response was very simple: you can have the meeting wherever you would like to have it. And I asked him if having it at the property would be a good idea, and he said it might be a good idea due to the fact that people can see the property, they can understand what we're trying to do. And so that's what we did. Yes, we were slightly underprepared because we didn't have a great amount of information as to what we should do for that meeting. And there wasn't power on at the house. That was because the power had been shut off from the previous owner, and the Skinners had not paid to have the power turned back on. And we were required to have the meeting after a certain time. Otherwise, it would be considered not to be the most ideal time, and then the neighborhood could say, well, you had it at an inopportune time. If it had been me, I'd have had it at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, but we were told we can't have it on a weekend, can't have it on a Friday, so we have to have it Monday through Thursday, and we have to have the meeting after 5 p.m. Well, in December, after 5 p.m., it's starting to get dark. There's not much we can do about that. So we worked with what we had. In comment to Mr. Jimenez saying that he did not realize there was a second floor, I have an email right here to him, sent to him on September the 7th, with the plans.
Including the second story.
All three floor plans and the front elevation showing a second story.
3 months prior to.
3 months prior to. That was given to him, given to staff, prior to us even knowing we had the house designed, ready to submit for construction documents when we found out we had to have a neighborhood meeting, because when we originally spoke to them, they said because of what we were asking, it was a use permit and we would not need a community meeting. Now that could have been our misunderstanding. I'll accept that. So, and we did accept that and said, okay, we'll step back a second. We'll go through the process. We've gone through the process now, and now everyone is saying that we didn't take the steps necessary. We went through our 30 days, which was from Mr. Southard said we had to have a 30-day waiting period to demolish the house. We went through that 30-day period. Nobody said anything. Letters were sent to everyone
You're in the packet.
that are in the packet that this is what we were wanting to do. They had ample time. When the folks that did show up to the meeting showed up, they had a set of plans that weren't even ours. It was from a previous project that was proposed on the site. Now, how they even got that, I have no idea, but it wasn't even our information. We did go over the plan. We got a lot of questions that had nothing to do with what we were asking to do. And we weren't notified we had to have a use permit for the second story until Mr. Abramson kind of said, hey, wait a minute, this is the second story. We got to have a use permit for that too. We didn't know that until our neighborhood meeting. We thought the second story was fine up until 3 months after we started this process. So there's a lot of miscommunication going on in this process, none of which we are trying to hide from anyone in the community. We went through the process that was laid out before us when we started the process with staff. I'm not going to throw them under the bus and say that they did something wrong or they made a mistake. Clearly, there was some things miscommunicated, maybe some things misunderstood on our part, but we have done everything we can to accommodate them, and we feel like we're trying to hit this moving target. In regards to your comment about the vegetation, at the moment, there is only plans to tear down one tree, and it's more of a shrub, and that's actually because it's sitting literally in the foundation of the existing building. So we will have to remove that. There is the possibility that when we're digging the basement, we may damage the root system of the existing really nice tree. I don't know what the tree is that's out in front of the house. There is no intentions of leaving that gone. If we do damage the root system and the tree dies, the full intention is to replace that tree because they want the tree in their front yard to shade the front of the house and the porch and all of that. They have no intentions of, as you said, taking away the vegetation. And we have designed the house in such a way, I designed it in a very Frank Lloyd Wright prairie style kind of mid-century look with pushing the second floor back from the first floor. So to try to keep that ground level looking and feeling like the rest of the houses in the neighborhood. So we've tried to make those accommodations for everyone, especially the neighborhood, to feel like we're not just trying to impose a giant monstrosity onto the neighborhood.
And the lot coverage is really not that much different from what's already there.
Correct. We're increasing, the main house lot coverage is increasing from 900 square feet to 1,500 square feet, which is 400 square feet. And then the garage is increasing from, I believe the garage is currently 700 or 800 square feet. And I think we're increasing it to, I don't know if we're even really increasing, I think it's about the same. So we're not taking a bunch of vegetation off of the lot.
What would take away more vegetation is if you make us have 5 parking spaces.
But in regards to that though, we do have, like, across the back, if by moving the garage 16 feet in, there is actually a space in the corner there too. So technically, we do have room for, you know, if you double parked the garage, you would have room for 2 cars in the garage, 3 cars across the back, and 1 car in the front. So that's 6 parking places that we would have there. So
Let me do this. Would it help if I asked, does anyone have any questions? Would that help spur the conversation?
Chairman, could I,
If-
go ahead, sorry.
Please.
Some of what was said here was not remembered correctly because there were certain details at the meeting that we didn't share because we didn't know how the neighbors would feel about a pastor moving into their neighborhood. So we never shared that at the meeting. So what Karen is saying that Tad said at the meeting, trust me, I'm a pastor, that wasn't true. And so I don't think that she's remembering everything from the meeting correctly because I know we didn't talk about that because we didn't know if everybody would want that.
Let me do this. I think that I can safely speak for the whole commission and say we're not considering comments like that in our decision. So we don't need to pick apart who said what and all those, because we're not even,
It's hard to know.
we have to listen to everyone's comments, but just so you know, some of those things are immaterial to us. Saparna, did you have something you wanted to add?
Chairman, just to clarify that I'm not going to be here debating any of the process-related question, but I just wanted to clarify something that we received an application, we turned it around, provided comments. We originally told the applicant that because we have revisions we are requiring, that we technically would like to take it to January 22nd meeting. But with these feedback of our site plan review comments, we heard back the day of, which is the December 19th, which is our publication date for Arizona Republic for the publication of notification for use permits. At that point, the applicant obviously was aware of the use permit process. They were aware that they were most likely going to go to the January 22nd. They got our feedback. They said, we agreed to all your review comments, and we are going to revise the plan according to your request. Can we still go on this agenda, the January 8th agenda? We actually made a special call to Arizona Republic past our deadline to accommodate that and make our notifications, our postcards, all of those to make this happen for this as opposed to the January 22nd with the good faith that the applicant is going to submit a revised plan that satisfies what we had requested. And as I had indicated in the study session, the site plan and the building elevation with the door and the way the windows are being proposed, we did have some concern, and that's one of the reasons that we were reluctant about changing the staff report. We indicated that in our email that Ryan just said on Friday that we would not revise anything at this per also the policy that 48 hours prior we get something 48 hours prior, by noon on Friday we will revise it if we are still satisfied with it. So I just wanted to clarify some of the process related question from staff because I don't want to debate what was being happened, but this is the process. This was a fast turnaround from December 12th to taking it to an agenda on January 8th that you see today with a lot of hand-holding and things that staff accommodated as part of this. So I just wanted to put that on the record.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to address that. There was a lot of hand-holding because there was a lot of miscommunication. I just want to leave it at that. I don't want to get into the debate either about what happened because that's kind of irrelevant. The conversation I had with Mr. Weaver was that if you make these changes, then you have our support, and we made those changes. The changes that were talked about were the changes that we made that you've seen in the revisions, and then we get a response back that yes, staff wants more. We've now decided that you have more comments, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with the fact that you have more comments, except for it's delaying this process further and further, and we feel like we make this move and then they make this move and we're not connecting. And I don't know how to make that fit. And again, we're getting into this argument of, multifamily versus single family, and it feels like we're kind of running a little bit around in a circle here, where it doesn't sound like you guys are opposed to the project. It just sounds like you guys are opposed to how we submitted the paperwork for the project. Kind of speak, with maybe the exception. I hear what your comments are. I'm a little bit more, I don't know, not quite as heavy spoken. I don't find what you said offensive. I find it to be your opinion. Whether I agree with that is somewhat irrelevant. You're entitled to that. You're a commissioner. You've obviously been selected to be up there. So respectfully, if that's your opinion that this doesn't fit the neighborhood and you don't want to do that, it's my job to try to convince you otherwise, but not to, bulldoze you on that. So I think ultimately what we're trying to do is build a nice house for a family to live in and be part of the community. That's ultimately what we're trying to do here.
And Chairman, just to remind, staff recommendation is still it's not a denial. Staff recommendation is still to approve with the conditions. Just wanted to remind that, there is, at no point has staff said this is not supported as long as the conditions are being met. That if that's the design intent, I just wanted to clarify that's, that the request was to remove those conditions from the staff report, and that's what we did not feel comfortable at the time, as of Friday afternoon.
I also want to give Mr. Jimenez the credit that we did discuss what our other options were, and the biggest reason why we were reluctant to change the process is the cost and time, loss of as you put it, sir, just the overall cost of things. We started this process August 30th. Here we are in January. We're still not really any further than we were. And if we have to start over the process to go to a multifamily, then now we're 3 months further along, and there's costs that are associated with all of that, and we're trying to make the project still feasible. So if the consensus of the staff or of the commission is that we make it a multifamily, and the biggest hurdle is the parking, which we clearly already meet, the biggest hurdle for us is just the time. If there was a way to avoid having to go through the entire process again, I don't know that there would be benefit in hearing a second or having a second community meeting for the same thing. We've heard what the people who are concerned about it.
Let me just tell you that we are bound by our rules to some extent. We try very hard not to bend them because, well, how do we know we bent them the right way?
Sure.
So we try to make sure that we're checking the boxes, but still satisfy the intent of, All right. I have one question for you, and this is a very simple question. And I apologize if I missed it. Are you Jared Lineberger?
Yes, I am.
And you were functioning as the architect for this project, correct?
I am not a licensed architect. I'm a designer, but I do own an architecture firm, and I have a registered architect that signs for me.
Okay,
so
fair
just
enough.
To clarify what my role is, yes.
Fair enough.
I am
Thank
the
you.
one that designed it.
Okay. Still your time if there are other remarks you wish to make. I feel like we've hit most of the points, but if there are other things you feel you need to hit.
So just to clarify, staff is saying that they are approving or backing our plan for
They
single
are
family.
recommending approval. We're the ones who make that call, but they are recommending approval, yes.
And you would have to overrule that or go against that recommendation if you delay
We
this.
take a vote, and we take into consideration what they've said.
Okay. Right.
Questions for the Skinners? All right, I think we'll thank you then. All right, so it was fairly intense. I think we aired it out fairly well. What does the commission think? Comments?
I wasn't paying attention. Can we start over? I do have one comment for the Skinners. It wasn't really a question, so I waited till the question portion was over. One point of clarification. A lot of times applicants, when they get frustrated with the process and they think that they've kind of got clear direction and they've met what the recommendations of staff are, remember those are just recommendations of staff. That's what is going to get you to the point where you get a recommendation from staff to the commission of approval. And usually it comes with a set of stipulations and conditions that allow the staff to say, okay, now we're comfortable with it if you do these things that we've listed. But they can't promise anything. All they can say is, you know, if you do all those things, we're, you know, you've got our blessing, if you will, or our recommendation. That recommendation comes to us in our packet, and over the last 4 or 5 days, we've reviewed your case as well as everything else on our agenda. But there's no telling what 7 people up here that have, you know, different backgrounds and different opinions are going to do with that recommendation and the testimony we hear tonight. I will tell you, we will leave here, I believe, with a vote on the matter that's been presented to us today. Not a continuance, because I know if no one else does, I am going to make a motion to deal with the use permit that's been placed in front of us. And if that passes, so be it. If it fails, so be it. There's also the process of that an applicant can take with that decision, and they can appeal it. You know, we're not the final body that could hear any decision that's made tonight. So with that being said, I think you've gone far enough in this process that you've chosen that you should hear a decision from this body. And if there's a second there, then we'll have a vote. I don't know which way it'll go, but we'll have a vote.
Fair enough. Thank you, Vice Chair DiDomenico. Well said, as always. Other comments? Commissioner Summers.
Well, I'll do my best to stay in our lane here and talk about things that are relevant to this commission, but there are two things that are really clear. You know, the demolition, first of all, is not in the purview of this committee. I personally toured this house when it was up for sale. It was in bad condition, and the roofs were sagging. There was asbestos. There was every hint that there were major issues, and that's why we didn't move forward. So I completely understand your decision to move forward with a demolition. On the design side, again, I know that's not within our purview. For the record, I like the design. It's fine. The challenge that I've got with our process, I think the city could do a little bit better of a job explaining the process and helping you understand that if you're going to add a second story, that you've got to go and do a use permit. That is in the code. It might not be really well known. I think we can do a better job getting the word out on that. The one that bothers me the most is the informal policy that has no basis in code that we have a neighborhood meeting. I don't know how anyone would know that. And I think we've got to have certainty. If you're thinking about buying a property, you need to know the rules. And if that's not written down anywhere, or I just have a real hard time with that. So not sure where this is going to go. I appreciate your efforts moving forward and trying to get this approved. And I'd be in support of moving forward with staff's recommendation. So not ready to make a recommendation yet. I'm going to let everybody else speak.
Commissioner Brown, please. Thank you, Commissioner Summers.
So if we're only talking about the 8-foot setback on the south side, I have a suggestion that may sound radical, but it's not, because these are obviously computer-drawn drawings. You could take 2 feet out of this building in a couple of hours and have a 10-foot setback, and all the rooms are wide enough in the north-south direction. Of course, they're not. There's going to be some imposition, but we've seen dwellings and especially apartments with itty-bitty bedrooms, and these will still be, I think, more than I had when I was growing up back in Pennsylvania. So I'm going to suggest that if that was it's kind of late to pitch this idea, but we often ask applicants if they're willing to make a change, and that's not really as difficult as it may at first glance appear. And in fact, it will save a few $100 on construction cost. Can we bring them up and ask that question, or is that improper? I didn't think of it. I actually didn't think of that till now when we're talking about the limits of what we're actually reviewing. Can we ask that of the
Ask away.
Is that, do you agree with me that that's actually a slice and dice and you could do it in a few hours?
I would say.
And is it acceptable more importantly, is it acceptable as a change? 2 feet.
No one has had an issue with that. up until maybe tonight. No one has had any concern about
I think
the
that's all we're actually
setback.
reviewing, is this 8-foot setback. Okay. Okay, I mean, that's the gist of that's the gist of the intensification question and the use permit. Okay.
Oh,
So,
majority of homes in Maple and Ash are in the setback already. Many have several structures on a certain property that are in the setback. It's not an aberration. We designed it that way because it fits the needs of our family. So we would like to not do that, especially since there's not a lot of opposition.
To answer your question, it is not a slice and dice. I would have to send it back to my structural engineer. We'd have to recalculate beams, redo entire calculation packages. It'd be a couple $1,000s just in the engineering.
let's take this off the table.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other comments? Commissioner Amorosi, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm kind of torn because I'm used to seeing that we're supposed to go through the design. I think it's weird that you only have the front door and you have to go through a bedroom to get upstairs. I don't see what the purpose of that guest bedroom is. But the prairie design is nice and it does fit in with the neighborhood. What's in front of us, the permit standard to reduce the south side from 10 to 8, the south side neighbor says that it's okay with him. And so that's a big concern, as long as he's okay with it, because they're not doing anything on the north side. And then just adding a second story doesn't bother me, because I know there's a lot of other homes that go at least 2 stories, and I'm worried that it could be a lot worse. And I feel that the Skinner's intentions are true as far as being a pastor and wanting to help out missionaries and things like that. So it's within what we need to approve. I can't see anything that negative about this project. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Johnson.
I would agree with what Commissioner Amorosi was just saying. However, I have a little bit of different take on it. I agree. I like the aesthetic of the property, of the project, but I truly believe that the intended and even to some extent the stated purpose of this development, this residence, is multifamily. The way it's been described is being used sounds multifamily. The way it was originally laid out is more multifamily. And my concern is not necessarily with the parking, but with those other standards that are required for multifamily development. So that's where I stand with it. And I don't think that the way it's laid out and designed meets that requirement. And it's been said that it probably would not, or it would not. So I think that needs to be revisited.
Commissioner Casano, do you want to chip in?
Yes, I'd like to chime in. First off, questions of the staff. The revised plans, as we've seen tonight, are the ones that you are saying that are okay for you guys to put your stamp of approval on if the commission so decides. That's your recommendation.
So the recommendation with conditions pertains to what was attached to the staff report. The revisions was an exhibit for you to see the applicants, how they were accommodating some of the conditions. But we could certainly read into the record if those plans are what you believe is satisfy what you are seeking as far as what the goal of the project, then we can certainly refer to those set of plans. But for now, all I could say is that the recommended approval was based on the plans submitted and provided in the attachment section.
Okay. As of Friday, right? This set of plans you handed me tonight are the ones you're talking about.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Right.
These are the plans you're talking about? The ones you handed us tonight?
Oh, yes, the
Okay,
revised set of
okay,
plans are the ones I
okay.
handed you at
I just
the
want to make
reception.
sure I'm looking at the right thing here and everything else. Well, based on what I've seen, based on the condition of the home as described by one of the commissioners, that this home couldn't be salvaged even if you wanted to. So for somebody to come in there, buy the property, and they're going to have to take this down anyway and rebuild a house similar to this in the same size and meeting all the criteria that would perhaps some of the neighbors would like to see there, doesn't to me be economically viable just because of the fact that the property costs are so high. So based on that, I see no reason why we should delay the vote, and this, my vote would be to approve this.
All right, so we've been at this for a while. Forgive me. I'm going to chime in a little bit. I think it's a little bit unfortunate that we've kind of gotten where we are. I know you're very frustrated, and that's understandable. I work in architecture myself, and I can assure you that every project is always a slog with moving targets. Changes happen all the time to budget and to program and city and county and everybody. There are a lot of players that have to be satisfied, and pieces show up gradually, and you have to unpack the car and repack it. You have to unpack the car and repack it over and over and over and over. And that's why I advise people not to go into architecture as a profession. It's a pain. I happen to enjoy it, though, because I think it's worthwhile when you get where you need to go. And I'd like to see you get where you want to go. I will be sort of candid, and I think this is one of the large values of hiring a design professional who's familiar with the particulars of the process that you're about to engage in. It sounds like there was a little bit of lack of knowledge about how this would go, and that's regrettable. I really feel it's a design professional, their responsibility to find out all the particulars of the process and make this as painless as possible. And I'm afraid that's, I think, where we had some hitches. So having said that, we are here to talk about 2 use permits. We have 5 criteria, and I will emphasize those again. Any significant increase in vehicular or pedestrian traffic, nuisance arising from emission of odor, gas, etc., contribution to the deterioration of the neighborhood, compatibility with existing surrounding structures and uses, and adequate control of disruptive behavior. I will personally say I see no fault in these 2 permits with respect to increase in vehicular traffic, nuisances, contribution to deterioration of the neighborhood. In fact, it would be the opposite, or inadequate control of disruptive behavior, both inside and outside. My qualm is on number 4, compatibility with existing structures. I personally do not feel this is very compatible. This is clearly a multifamily project. It has been described that way. It has been designed that way. It cannot function properly as a single-family home because, I mean, look at the layout. You're really going to go through a guest room, upstairs. It's just, that's not a single-family home. And I'm convinced that at some point that window on the outside does become a door, because why wouldn't it? You want your guests to be able to go right upstairs and not come through your home. It's a multifamily project. That's what it ought to be. It ought to go through that process, and it ought to be subject to all the requirements that we've heard about. So having said that, I personally will not be able to vote in favor of this because I think there's some things that need to be looked at in order to get there. If they were willing to go through the process to examine all those things with staff, I think they could get there. But as it is, I can't vote to approve it. So those are my thoughts. So, Commission, do I hear a motion regarding our motion? Did I say that right? Do I hear a motion regarding our application?
Chair.
Commissioner Summers.
Just a clarification from staff real quick first. If this commission were to approve this tonight and our applicant decided that they did want to proceed with a door and multifamily, could they come back and get an approval again?
Commissioner Sumner's, members of the commission, so if the approval is with the conditions as stated in the packet, then the applicant wouldn't be able to make that modification. They would have to go through actually a multifamily development process as a result of modifying significant changes beyond any TI-related changes to the building. If the conditions weren't imposed and were removed, then it would be subject to a very similar process. Again, we'd be looking at it from a multifamily design review standpoint with design standards.
But our approval, if we were to vote that way tonight, would not preclude them or inhibit them from moving forward with an application under multifamily, right?
Correct.
Okay. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd move approval of PL 18-0344, including ZUP 180111 and ZUP 180112 for both use permits, sorry, for the use permit and the use permit standard for the Skinner residence.
Chair, I would second that motion.
All right, so motion to approve as written by staff from Commissioner Sumners and seconded from Commissioner Casano. All those in favor by show of hands, please. And opposed, if any? Motion passes 4-3. You have your permits. All right, so now we still have more excitement ahead, folks. We have one more application, which is for EOS Fitness. And is this, Karen, is this yours? If you would, please. It's on it.
All right. Good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Karen Stovall, Senior Planner. This property is located south of Warner Road and is in the Agave Center. It's currently vacant and is zoned GID, General Industrial District. The owner plans to split the lot into two and develop the west half. No development is planned for the east half at this time. The applicant is requesting approval of a use permit for a fitness center in the GID zoning district and a development plan review for a new single-story, 35,399 square foot building. The plan shows the building oriented to the north towards Ranch Road, and driveways are proposed on all three street frontages. The parking area on the east side of the building is designed with the intent of connecting to future parking on what is shown as Lot 2 when that lot is developed. The Agave Center was developed with detached sidewalks and a strip of evergreen elm trees between the curb and sidewalks. And the landscape plan shows those additional elm trees to be added in the strip where they're missing from being dead in the past. And evergreen elm and ironwood trees are used in the street frontage landscaping, and elm trees are also proposed within the parking lot landscape islands. As an accent, willow leaf acacia are proposed at the driveways and near the primary building entrance. There are 4 stipulations in the staff report in the staff's recommendation to provide additional shade on the building, provide a consistent plant palette in the parking lot, and to require that the street trees will be visible along Green Tree Drive, so they'd be placed in front of the parking lot screen walls. The single-story building is 45 feet high and is primarily finished with stucco and integrally colored concrete masonry units. Bronze tinted glazing is used near the primary entrance. Glazing elsewhere on the building is limited due to the interior functions that the applicant wishes to have screened. Horizontal steel channels wrap the corners of the buildings as accents. There is an outdoor exercise area on the south elevation, and this will be enclosed by a steel picket fence topped with a stucco wall. Staff is recommending approval of the use permit and the development plan review subject to the conditions in the staff report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, questions for Ms. Stovall? Well, I guess we're making it easy on you now. Thank you. All right, we'll invite our applicant to come and tell us about your project. If it isn't obvious, we have already reviewed what's in the packet, so we're pretty familiar with that. But if you want to hit whatever high points are interesting to you.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just, my name is Eric Gerster. I work for a sustainability engineering group. I am a salaried employee, so a little past 5 o'clock, so I'll make it brief. This is for the EOS Fitness Center at Agave Center. And I guess I had a long and elaborate presentation, but I'll leave it at this. I heard concerns about parking and the siding of the building. The key thing with the siding of the building was that we went through a couple different iterations of the siding. This location gives us a little bit of frontage toward the main drive-in. It pushes the building to the back. The end user, EOS Fitness, has pretty good details about how they want their building sited. They like to have the presentation from the front. They like people using the gym to be able to be seen coming and going from the site for security reasons. And so we've kind of done that. And then the drives have a certain width that they also had determined. And so because of that, we couldn't add more lanes to the front or a lane to the back without pushing the building one way or another and narrowing the lanes because they like it more open. I think that covers the questions you had before. We did meet the parking requirements as required by Tempe for the use, which required quite a few parking spaces. If need be, there could be a shared parking easements in the future with Lot 2, but at this point in time, it does fit. So with that, I will go to any specific questions.
I like that slide. Okay, questions for Mr. Gerster. It is Gerster?
Gerster.
Okay. Commissioner Brown? Okay.
It appears that the landowner also does own the vacant area. This is one parcel. Are there any plans for that, or what's the prognosis? Is it going to be more parking, or is there any plan for that space?
Is there? You're saying it was one parcel, right?
Yes. Is there any plan for the vacant land to the
There's no
east?
plans at this time. We've had a couple of different considerations, but nothing that we're going to stick with at this time. Probably more likely to be office, like some of the other parcels in there.
It certainly appears to be large enough that it could be a freestanding and.
Right, will be a freestanding building.
And I was going to talk about flipping things, but you've kind of addressed that you have a security, and I think maybe that's the overriding concern, and we're talking about polishing a piece of iron. So I'll drop that concept. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so now we'll open our public comment section. Is there anyone from the public that would like to make a comment? If so, white cards in the back. Seeing none, I will close public comment section. All right, well, that was easy. Okay, so I'm not sure why we chose to hear this if no one wanted to ask questions or make comments.
You already answered my question.
Oh, that was it? Oh. All right, let's have a motion then.
I move for the approval of PL 180280.
Do I hear a second? All right, motion to approve from Commissioner Johnson and seconded by Vice Chair DiDomenico. All those in favor by show of hands, please. And the motion passes 7-0. Thank you very much. All right, so that's the bulk of our meet tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Suparna, do you have any announcements on future applications that you'd like to share?
Sure, Chairman. And Commission members, for January 22nd, DRC, we have a request for a preliminary subdivision plat for Baseline Retail at 2023 West Baseline Road. And we also have a request for a development plan review for 6557 square foot addition to Bill Luke's Tempe at 7799 South Autoplex Loop. Those are the only two items for the next agenda.
All right. Usually I miss something. Did I miss anything? I think not. So we're adjourned, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.